Welcome to this Aztlander presentation, a Jornada Mogollon cultural landscape, Aberration or Microcosm of the Southwest, with David Greenwald of the Jornada Research Institute. Enjoy!
We'll start out just by simply saying that the discovery of a Mesilla Phase site in Tularosa Canyon did not seem so unusual except for a large depression on the main ridge in the highest part of the site. Such large depressions have been unknown in the Jornada Mogollon region. My first impression was that it was a great kiva, also an unknown feature type in southern Tularosa Basin during the Mesilla Phase. Here's an image of the Great Kiva half excavated. This presentation examines the Mesilla Phase occupation of the Jornada Mogollon within the southern Tularosa Basin, and more specifically in Tularosa Canyon, which drains into the basin. This area is located in the northern portion of the Chihuahuan Desert with a creosote bush and scrub mesquite environmental zone today. Cultural attributes and terminology largely unassociated with Jornada Mogollon sites used herein include great kivas, public architecture, irrigation systems and irrigation communities, floodplains, and terraced fields, residential wards, and astronomical observatories. There are two conceptual questions considered in this presentation tonight. Is the Mesilla Phase occupation of Tularosa Canyon an aberration within the defined constructs of the Jornada branch? And did the existence of these dispersed Mesilla Phase villages or irrigation communities evolve due to local environmental circumstances? So who were the Jornada Mogollon? Basically, the Jornada Mogollon were the southeasternmost branch of the Jornada culture. They occupied southern New Mexico, West Texas, and northern Chihuahua, and the period of occupation is somewhat debated near the beginning, but sometime between 200 and 400 AD to lasting until about 1450. It's believed that they originated from the late Archaic period, known as the Waco phase. And those people, as well as the early Jornada Mogollon people, were hunters, gatherers, and collectors. Maize was introduced into this area about BCE 1200, based on studies primarily with information coming from Fresnel Shelter, a pretty well-known archaic site located not too far from Tularosa Canyon. The Jornada Mogollon is the least well-known of all the Mogollon branches, sitting at the southeastern margin of the Southwest, the American Southwest. A long-held consensus view recognized them as having originated from the late Archaic Waco Phase people. And Fresnel Shelter, which is actually about 15 miles south of Tularosa Canyon, has provided considerable information about the late Archaic period. The recognition of the Jornada Mogollon separate from the late Archaic peoples is largely based on the advent of ceramic containers, as the early Mesilla Phase retains many of the subsistence strategies of the preceding Waco Phase. The geographical extent of the Jornada Mogollon is shown here according to Donald Leamer, who was primarily responsible for defining the Jornada Mogollon, and revised by Miles Miller in 2018. At the far northern extent is the Taylor Draw site, and across the Sacramentos to the east is the Dunlop Salazar site. Dunlop Salazar dates about 100 years earlier than Creekside, with similar large pit houses, according to Thomas Rochek, and located in proximity to Rio Bonito and a likely area for irrigation. Taylor Draw dates to the later part of the Mesilla phase and has a probable Great Kiva based on Stuart Peckham's excavations in the 1970s, but a live source of water does not appear to have existed. It is, however, ideally situated to conduct floodwater farming across the broad floodplains found in this area that I have addressed in previous studies in similar locations nearby. This is a map that shows the Tularosa Basin. As you can see, the hatched area actually represents the basin floor. If you look, I'm going to have to use my cursor, unless I can get my, yeah, I'm going to have to use my cursor here. But here's Tularosa. And in this polygon that's outlined in black that says Rio Tularosa is our project area. It extends from the mouth of the canyon upstream to the area of Bent, which is a small community and a side drainage to the Rio Tularosa. Now, within this area, we discovered that there were what I call true villages. They were year-round occupied sites with at least 100 people present at any given time. And these types of sites were largely unknown during the Mesilla phase. Full-time agriculturalists were also largely unknown until the discovery of Creekside Village. In Tularosa Canyon, villages or irrigation communities have now been identified as linear, dispersed settlements on the Pleistocene terraces. So here we have breakdown of the temporal sequence of the Jornada Mogollon, divided by formative period and classic period. Formative period represented by the Mesilla phase, circa 200 to 1000, and Doña Ana phase dating from CE 1000 to approximately 1150. The classic period is represented by the El Paso phase, which dates from about 1150 to 1450. Now, one of the problems that we have is that the Mesilla phase has not received a great deal of attention, although Miles Miller has attempted to subdivide these phases a little bit by basically dividing them into early and late phases. So this photograph here is a picture of Tularosa Canyon, and what you see in the is the row of cottonwood trees that grow up the incised canyon bottom. And the canyon today is deeply incised. It wasn't like this prehistorically, but the stream channel comes down in this direction. Can you see my cursor by any chance on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, so it's following the course of the stream, and so you can see some water here, and then it disappears under this vegetation. But this is typical of Tularosa Canyon, and the vegetation in the foreground is the historic and prehistoric floodplain surface. This area down below is the modern floodplain. And then in the far distance, we see what basically are creosote bush and mesquite flats, and then lesser vegetation as we start climbing on up the Pleistocene terraces. This is the Rio Tularosa today. It is a channelized stream, and it flows at about 13 cubic feet per second. year-round. It's a perennial stream, and it was apparently this way all through the prehistoric occupation and dating back at least 6,000 years based on our environmental studies of the area. But prehistorically, and especially in the area of Creekside Village, it was more of a broad wetland with very slow moving water. And this is bore out by the arroyo cuts that we see with the broad horizontal beds of lacustrine deposits that are formed in a wetland environment. So just briefly, we'll talk about the conventional perspectives of the Mesilla phase. As already said, it originated from the earlier Waco phase. These people were considered to be highly mobile. They practiced a seasonal round subsistence pattern following basically plants that would become productive, either producing seeds or other parts of the plants that would be edible in the beginning in the late spring, throughout the summer, and into the fall. So they were collectors, gatherers, and hunters. They practiced a limited amount of agriculture, although that's really difficult to do if you're constantly on the move. So in order to practice agriculture, you'd have to leave some people behind to tend the garden plots or fields. They also consumed large numbers of rabbits. And this is bore out by the presence of rabbit mandibles commonly found on the house floors and large quantities of mandibles that are found in the refuse dumps. They lived in settlements, in winter settlements. They're made up of more substantial pit structures, and they exploited the landscape at each opportunity that they had. The difference in what we're finding in Tularosa Canyon and at Creekside Village is basically that, to begin with, the presence of a great kiva. We also have identified numerous pit house depressions on the surface. These are very subtle depressions, and in 3 of the 5 residential wards that we've identified, we've mapped 84 pit house depressions, and we anticipate that there's probably 200 or more pit houses at the site. Trash was disposed of as sheet middens or in abandoned pit house depressions. They built multiple ditch systems and created reservoirs. And there's also a modified spring that was used as a borrow source for collecting gypsum clay to make adobe for the upper walls of the Great Kiva. They built agricultural terraces on the Pleistocene slopes where there was an accumulation of lush sediments that was these lush sediments being very good for agriculture. And then also they had expansive fields on the floodplain. It was a dispersed settlement pattern made up of multiple residential wards that were restricted to non-arable land. So they were specifically choosing areas that had no agricultural potential, and therefore they were not taking up a space that could be farmed. So in this image, what we're looking at is a distribution of great kivas and irrigation systems in Tularosa Canyon. Since we found the Great Kiva at Creekside Village, we've spent a considerable amount of time exploring the rest of the canyon in order to determine the distribution not only of Mesilla Phase sites, but also the discovery of additional Great Kivas. We have potentially 6 more Great Kivas that we've found. And in addition to the irrigation system represented at Creekside Village, we now have mapped a total of 4 irrigation systems, 3 additional ones, So there's quite a bit going on in the canyon. So this map shows the distribution of the kivas and the known extent of the irrigation systems with everything that we have defined and recorded within the context of a cultural landscape. It's necessary for us to reconsider the development and complexity of the Mesilla phase. Miles Miller accurately predicted that such villages would be found on the river terrace landforms. Those landforms are those first terraces next to the streams that occur in the Tularosa Basin and other areas where the Jornada Mogollon lived and subsisted. Here, irrigation networks supported year-round occupation and exploitation of water resources and arable soils were converted to intensive agricultural use to their fullest extent. The later El Paso phase consisted of the apartment complexes, or what are commonly referred to as Pueblo architecture, many concentrated in the basin and its margins, again, where reliable water sources could be used for agriculture and domestic use. However, that was much later than the Mesilla phase. So, in reconsidering the Mesilla phase, this is a map of the main part of Creekside Village. The white areas represent the residential wards. We have the Great Kiva located here. The canal on the north side begins up in this area, follows these line of dots with some solid lines in various places, and continues on down the canyon. The canal on the south side begins over on this side and continues as a solid line, and much of Highway 70 has taken it out. The reservoir is located at the north end of the site, and coming out of the reservoir is a ditch that brings water down to where the agricultural terraces are. The dark areas where all the vegetation is the historic floodplain. It's entrenched. You can see the entrenchment of where the stream channel is today, but this is all agricultural fields from the occupation of Creekside Village. Once we found the site, we started doing a series of testing activities, testing each of the elements that we identified at the site to try to understand exactly what the site consisted of. And so we had a rather small sample, but it was a very informative sample. And then we later implemented a cultural landscape or a holistic approach that contributed to the proposed updated interpretations of the Mesilla phase that includes both permanent agricultural villages and the highly mobile collector-gather strategies combined. So the description of the Jornada Mogollon people as highly mobile collector-gatherers is actually quite accurate, but there were other people who chose to be agriculturalists, and they were basically living side by side, but exploiting different environmental zones. So we've dated the site from 600 to 900 AD, although we have retrieved one date of 500 from the basal deposits of the reservoir. We fully anticipate that we will find features that date earlier than 600 as our investigations progress. Now, this is the Great Kiva, and drawing a plan view of it in relationship to the topography that's located in the northern part of the site. So this is a north-northeast to south-southwest trending ridge, and they built the Great Kiva over the southeastern side of this ridge, digging into these Pleistocene cobbles and gravels that are cemented and really difficult to dig in, but they put it there anyway. If you notice up here where my scale bar is and site number is, this is a very level area. It doesn't have the Pleistocene gravels and cobbles, and it would have made perfect sense to build this great kiva in that location. You'll also notice that I'm showing the summer solstice azimuth as well as the winter solstice azimuth, and they intersect at the hearth here. So when we opened up the southern half of the kiva and we found the location of the hearth, we also were able to observe the winter solstice and summer solstice rises from the center of the Great Kiva, and the hearth is the common intersect point for these two celestial events. So it's quite interesting to see this because this helps explain why they built the Great Kiva in this location rather than up on the flatter area where it would have been easy digging. So there was a purpose for doing this. And the Great Kiva itself, it's perfectly circular. It has a bench that runs all the way around it and an entryway in the southeast wall. So when you enter into the Great Kiva, you walk in, you step onto the bench, and then you step down into the depression of the Great Kiva. It's not deep. It's the deepest part, of course, is up on the upslope side near the highest part of the ridge at over a meter, maybe a meter 30 in that area below the ground surface. It has 4 post holes, main post holes, and those would support a rectangular framework. And from that rectangular framework of horizontal beams, other beams would be extended over to the walls. The walls, the adobe walls, are thick. They're over 70 centimeters thick in most places. In some places, they're thicker than that. And they were designed to be load bearing. So they were holding up a great deal of weight that was up on the rooftop. Yeah, I think that covers that. Now, the irrigation systems themselves are made up of paired canals, and both Creekside Village canals and the Twin Kivas canals, those canals are over 2 meters wide, and they're at least 70 centimeters deep. The canals that make up the Germany Falls system and the Bridal Falls system, which are down in this part of the canyon, seem to be slightly narrower, but we haven't trenched them. We've only identified them on the surface. And so we're not exactly sure about the morphology of those canals. Let's see. Okay, so one of the things about the canal systems that we have in Tularosa Canyon is that each one of the systems, and we know where they head because we can calculate that by gradient, but each one of the systems is tied to the next system downstream in one manner or another. For example, here is the Twin Kiva system, and the terminus of the Twin Kiva system is the reservoir at Creekside Village. Creekside Village, North Main Canal here, extends down, and I found the actual location on the ground. It was visible on the surface where it dumps into the Germany Falls system on the north side. The south side of the Germany Falls system appears to connect with the Bridal Falls system, but that area has been heavily developed by residential use, and it's not entirely clear what's going on in there. But it does appear as though even though there are separate heads for these canal systems, they are all still linked together. Now, there's 2 reasons for doing this. First, to allow excess water from the system above to flow into the next system where it would be used, and 2, to allow water to travel from the head of the canyon to the terminus or the mouth of the canyon without returning to the stream channel to prevent water from re-entering the stream channel and waterlogging the fields during the non-irrigation periods of the year. So we think that these canals were running year-round. And this is just a little bit more of an enlargement of the terminus end of the Twin Kiva system. Twin Kiva system, where it delivers water to the reservoir at Creekside Village. Now, with regard to the residential wards and the pit houses, I mentioned there are 5 of them, and they are generally located in a linear dispersed pattern located on elevated portions of the Pleistocene terrace along the north side of the river. So they parallel the channel of the creek as well as the orientation of the canals. These are all areas that are not suitable for agriculture. Sediments are often cemented with gravels and cobbles. Their locations, however, provide a commanding view of the floodplain and the agricultural terraces below. 2 general shapes of houses have been identified so far, circular on the left and D-shaped on the right. Based on the surface expressions of the pit houses, once you get used to recognizing them, they become, at least to me, they become fairly apparent. But the surface expressions of the pit houses give us a mean size estimated between 30 and 35 square meters. The circular pit house that you see in this image is calculated at 44 square meters. These houses are huge. They're considerably larger than any previously discovered Mesilla Phase pit houses, with the possible exception of pit houses that are at the Dunlop Salazar site. They're of similar size, but they're not in the Tularosa Basin. They're quite a ways away, probably 45, 50 miles from here. And the average Mesilla Phase pit house, which would be located in the southern Tularosa Basin, and the other bolsons in the El Paso and over in the Las Cruces area, they will average about 7 square meters of floor area. So these houses are anywhere from 5 to 6 times as large as the typical Mesilla Phase pit house. But most of those pit houses aren't supporting agricultural families. Based on the size of the Creekside pit houses, they were likely occupied by extended families. And if we use Narol's formula for calculating household populations based on floor area, family size is estimated at no less than 10 individuals per house, including interior space. And that's probably an underestimation. All right, the function of great kivas. Well, it's pretty well accepted that great kivas were used for ritual activities and ceremonies. They're probably also used as facilities for governance and maybe even regulation. Social and political activities would also be associated with them. And community affairs, such as perhaps redistribution of surplus, may have been associated with these particular structures. Redistribution is oftentimes a ritual phenomenon that is undertaken by Puebloan people even to this day. There's also widespread recognition of their use to monitor astronomical events. The function of the great kivas as astronomical observatories at Creekside Village in particular could be used to monitor at least 8 celestial events and the entire eastern horizon. Architectural landform associations have long been recognized in association with astronomical alignments and used widely to discuss ritual landscapes that have included shrines, caves, springs, natural landmarks, and celestial events. Previously, I pointed out the winter and summer solstice alignments to the rise positions on the horizons as viewed from the central hearth of the Great Kiva. Both of these rise events are associated with notches on the horizon when viewed from the center of the Kiva. Based on the hearth serving as the common intersect point of these two events, we believe the location of the Great Kiva was calculated and predetermined, especially given that it was built on the slope of the ridge in cemented gravels and cobbles, rather than on a nearby level area where excavations would have been much easier to complete. So from the Creekside Great Kiva, they were able to watch the sun's annual cycle from the winter solstice rise to the summer solstice rise, and then back to the winter solstice rise position again. Now, only the eastern horizon is visible from the Creekside Great Kiva, so they were only focusing on the eastern horizon. The monthly cycle of the moon, or the synodic month, was probably also monitored, and the nodal cycle of the moon, a period of 18.6 years, with the major rise positions, were associated with conical landforms. And I'll show you those, I believe, in the next slide that's coming up. They also likely monitored Venus, both its synodic cycle of 584 days and its 8-year cycles, where it would return to its southeasternmost position on the horizon. This location is visible from the Great Kiva through the entryway, as it's located between the winter solstice sunrise and the southern lunar maximum position. And the one problem we're not sure about is it does not have any kind of a natural, what we would call a horizon marker that identifies that location, but it is visible, and they probably were watching it. The eastern horizon was used as a horizon calendar, much like the Hopi, Zuni, Acoma, and other Pueblos still do today. Okay, so here I'm showing you an image of the horizon points and paths in the program known as Stellarium, which is overlaid on a horizon photograph, and then this is produced through Peak Finder software. This photo represents the winter solstice rise at 7:37 a.m. On December 21st of 700 AD. So that's the nice thing about Stellarium. You can go back in time. It's almost like a time machine. The central hearth in this photograph is right of center at the bottom, and it's basically right where my cursor is in this area. There's a flat slab is lying there. The hearth aligns with the sunrise through the center of the entryway, with a notch on the horizon. The notch does not become visible until it's lit by direct sunlight, which is kind of interesting. Also shown are both lunar major rise positions. So here we have this conical landform. This is the southern lunar rise position and its trajectory line. Over here is the trajectory line of the northern lunar maximum rise. And it's a little too dark to see Round Mountain there, but I'll show you in the next slide what it looks like. And then also shown are both lunar minor rise positions. This is the southern lunar minor position where it rises, and this is the northern lunar rise position where it rises. So 9.3 years after the lunar major events are the lunar minor events, and then another 9.3 years to get back to the lunar major events. We are in the lunar major sequence right now of what they call the lunar standstills. And so we've been experiencing this now for the past probably 15 months, I think, something like that. I'd have to check to be sure. All right, so here we're looking at Round Mountain. This is the conical landform that you couldn't see in the previous image. And this has been produced to show the path of the lunar rise from behind Round Mountain. So Round Mountain is very important because it is a horizon marker for two major lunar events. From Creekside Village, it marks the northern lunar rise position. From the Great Kiva, it marks the southern lunar rise position. So that's really curious that you have two Great Kivas that are tied to the same horizon marker. And then over here on the other side, we have what we call Islatano Peak as a horizon marker, and the southern lunar rise position is tied to this particular peak. Okay, so now we're looking at the greater Mesilla Phase settlement and organization in Tularosa Canyon. The Twin Kivas Canal system is the longest at just over 3.5 miles. The Creekside system itself is 2 miles long. Germany Falls system is about 1.5 miles, but the northern portion of it, this portion right in here, is quite busy and complex with a number of small channels that extend across the landscape. And then the Bridal Falls system, we're not quite sure exactly how long it is, but if it is one system from its head, from where the diversion is here, to the mouth of the canyon, it would be almost 2 miles long. The Twin Kivas site, its name originates from the presence of two kivas. Testing in the southern kiva indicates that it has an entry on the west side. It has a central hearth that's very similar to the one that's in the Creekside Great Kiva. The alignment of the hearth through the entryway indicates this kiva was aligned with the winter solstice sunset. As shown here, the Great Kiva, which is up here on this ridge, is located high on the ridge that is well removed from the Tularosa Canyon floodplain. The name was given to it because it is twice the size of the next largest Great Kiva in the canyon, with an estimated floor area of over 200 square meters. So in comparison to the Creekside Great Kiva, which is only 89 square meters, this thing is quite large. Its isolation and size implies that it served a special function. No habitation features have been identified in association with it. There's none around it anywhere. It has a very, very low density artifact scatter. And the only other feature that's there is a thermal feature that may have been either a communal roasting pit or maybe used as a signal fire. This exceptionally large Great Kiva may have served as an administrative center associated with water management and allocation within the canyon. Due to its size, it could accommodate seating on its bench of perhaps up to 300 people. The Creekside Great Kiva, we estimate maybe 100 people would be able to sit on that bench if that's what it was used for. Based on its location and isolation, it does not appear to have been associated with a specific site or irrigation community. As such, we have to consider that its role may represent another tier in the hierarchy of the greater agricultural community, perhaps ensuring that appropriate measures were taken to assure that all water users receive their fair share. We're at the discussion part now. At Creekside Village, and at least at the Twin Kivas site, we recognize the extent to which people organize to construct canal systems, build kivas, create reservoirs, and develop terraced fields. So both Creekside Village and the Twin Kivas have these types of undertakings in common. Our studies have also shown that the floodplain at Creekside existed as a wetland area for nearly 6,000 years into the recent historic period. Botanical studies demonstrate that the wetland environment relied on a winter-dominant moisture regime over the 6,000-year period. The only time of deviation occurred between 300 CE and 1100 CE, when botanical studies indicate floodplain deposits were dependent upon summer-dominant moisture regime. This could be a result of the Rio Tularosa discharge being altered by prolonged drought or other environmental factors, or a result of human-caused changes in its flow. This period compares well with the Mesilla Phase occupation in the canyon and with the construction of the paired canals. Discharge would have been diverted from the wetlands, allowing the floodplain to dry and be converted to field areas, accounting for a change to summer dominant moisture as expressed in the botanical inventory as a result of irrigation activities. So here's an image of one of the cuts in the floodplain that show the bedding of the lacustrine deposits from the very bottom, all the way down here at the bottom, to the almost what would be considered the modern day surface up there. So 6,000 years of lacustrine sediment accumulation is represented here. To test the results of an initial botanical study, 2 additional studies were conducted. The first study was conducted by Vance Holliday and his team from the University of Arizona. Subsequently, we had 2 other efforts of collecting samples by Marie White and Samantha Krause and their team from Texas State University. The results of these 3 efforts are surprisingly quite similar, supporting the notion that the changes in seasonal moisture dominant patterns were likely a result of human alteration of the environment rather than normal flow and discharge patterns. One of the main things that we observed is the effect upon sedge. Sedges are wild, are water aquatic plants that really need a very wet environment to grow. So as we went into this dry period, there was a correlating decrease in the amount of sedges that were present. After the floodplain after the site was abandoned and the floodplain began to return to its original environmental status, the sedges also come back in quantity. And so it really does show that there was a period of time when probably the canals rerouted the water, draining the wetlands, and then preventing the floodplain from becoming waterlogged. And then after the site was abandoned, it returned to its original environmental setting. We anticipate that 6 or perhaps 7 irrigation systems or communities existed in Tularosa Canyon. In addition to the 4 that I've identified, here. Two likely were present on the Mescalero Apache Reservation upstream of the Twin Kiva system, and another positioned along the lower reaches of the Rio Tularosa below the mouth of the canyon where present-day Tularosa is. This is not simply based on speculation, but on remains of possible canals and the more apparent cultural remains that are occasionally reported by residents of Tularosa and Mescalero. It's also based on my own observations where I've actually seen some channels that appear to be segments of these canals. The position of the Great Kiva likely served as a gathering place for intercommunity affairs where concerns regarding water allocation and oversight were negotiated among the various irrigation communities. This Great Kiva has no apparent purpose associated with a specific village, as it is isolated on the ridge with a commanding view of the canyon. It likely could only monitor the winter solstice and southern lunar standstill events, unlike the Great Kiva at Creekside Village, which could monitor the entire yearly cycle and various lunar cycles. The Creekside Great Kiva may have served to monitor events primarily associated with the growing season, from which the horizon during the growing season is quite irregular, allowing almost daily observation regarding the sun's movement. Anyway, such close scrutiny of the horizon would allow monitoring water allocation on a rotation basis to those irrigating on perhaps a 7 to 10 day basis, meeting water demands while limited by reaching the carrying capacity of the water supply. So there's only so much water, and so it was probably highly regulated. So why do people monitor celestial events? Well, there's probably several reasons, but one would be as a means of calendric measure, timekeeping for rituals and ceremonies, and perhaps to track seasonal changes associated with economic pursuits. So agricultural economies would be really highly dependent on the seasonal changes and knowing when it would be safe to plant, when you would have to have your harvest done, because you wouldn't want your squash or your gourds to be in the field when that first killing frost came, because it would just turn them to mush and they'd do you no good. Freezing actually helps get the moisture out of the corn, and so it helps dry it so that it won't mold when it's in storage. But you can also monitor celestial events to predict or monitor weather patterns, such as precipitation events or patterns. In this case, since we are affected by the monsoon season that starts right about now, this time of year, it would be important for these farmers, even though they had irrigation, to be able to rely on some much needed rain, because rain, of course, is the best commodity you can get, much better than irrigation water. But if they're also pushing up to the margins of the carrying capacity of the water supply, they would welcome additional moisture for growing their crops. And then, of course, monitoring events could also help predict upcoming eclipses and other celestial events. Now, across the Southwest, Great Kivas were in use from as early as AD 620 and remain in use among some Pueblo groups today. They were focal centers of ritual, governance, and other social and political activities. Through time, they were integrated into the architectural layout of residential areas, being centers of community activities. The earliest, however, were often spatially set apart from the main habitation areas of residential sites, perhaps indicating their sacred associations or as observatories until accretionary growth encroached upon them. The common appearance of community architecture or structures, rooms and spaces that were used for special purposes, is a reflection of how ancient people viewed their cosmological associations, practiced their rituals and belief systems, and recognized their origins, surrounding space, and unity. So come back to one of the first questions that I asked, which is aberration or microcosm? I don't believe that the irrigation systems and settlements in Tularosa Canyon represent an aberration. By sharing the subtleties of the sites in Tularosa Canyon and pointing out surface expressions of canals, others will be defined in time by other archaeologists. Over the past 28 years of living in the Tularosa Basin, I've witnessed the presence of canals along streams or in canyons that once likely contained reliable discharge. These include Three Rivers Canyon, Grapevine Canyon, and Alamo Canyon. Grapevine Canyon was heavily exploited during historic times, with reservoirs built to impound discharge. The canals were likely modified at the same time to carry water to historic period fields, forever changing the integrity of the prehistoric features. Similarly, Alamo Canyon became a major water source for Alamogordo, with canals that conveyed water to the downtown area to water trees that lined the streets and supply water to the ponds at Alameda Park. Boy, if we had that water today. Three Rivers has at least one surviving prehistoric canal. Its source, however, is not Three Rivers, but an unnamed spring that originates north of the Three Rivers Channel and east of the expansive petroglyph site. Two features found along this canal include what appear to be a siltation basin used to slow the flow of water, and allow sediments to drop from suspension before continuing in the canal, in a canal of lesser gradient, to a reservoir that received the slower flowing water. Both of these features are located within proximity of the Three Rivers Village site to suggest temporal associations with the canal continuing in a parallel manner to the floodplain on the terrace on which the village is positioned. Nearby, the extensive Three Rivers petroglyph site with its 21,000 petroglyphs includes a number of glyphs and boulders with astronomical associations, solar markers, or displays of light and shadow interactions. Some examples are day-specific, whereas others occur over lengthy periods of time, 130 days or more. As Ron Barber describes in his stone calendar study, which was included in the Aztlander May 2025 issue, not only does this Jornada Mogollon petroglyph site exhibit considerable expressionism and symbology, it has numerous examples of what may represent specific stars, constellations, and asterism. Orion, for example, has been associated with the Mayan hearthstone creation myth, represented by Regal, Surf, and Alnatak, that form a near equilateral triangle with the Orion Nebula centered within, representing the smoldering hearth, as discussed by Krupp and also by our host, Jim Reed. Orion's belt may be present on a megalith precipitously set at a vertical edge of the basalt uplift midway along the ridge that contains a wealth of Jornada-style petroglyphs. Here on the south face of the cubical boulder shown here is the largest feline zoomorphic image found at Three Rivers. It is highly ornate with body decoration and widely considered to represent a jaguar. It is arguably a feline, could be a mountain lion. But Joan Price, who has studied and considered The symbolism of this particular feline and other associated elements displayed on the boulder for a period of nearly 30 years suggests that the great jaguar, I'm putting that in quotes, the great jaguar represents the guardian of the southern skies. Both solar and nighttime passages are represented with sunlight and shadows throughout the day and other arranged glyphs that may represent asterisms of constellations or specific constellations themselves. 3 nearly horizontal dots may represent Orion's belt, with Polaris positioned with a faint circle near the upper right, as shown here, of the south-facing side of the boulder, and Pleiades clustered along the right side of the jaguar panel. So some concluding thoughts here. The archaeological record defined as Jornada Mogollon in the Tularosa Canyon is far more complex than it is diminutive. For example, with examples of public architecture and ritual architecture, irrigation systems, landscape modification to create floodplain fields and terraced gardens, reservoirs, and the means to monitor celestial events. The irrigation community of Creekside Village provides considerable insights into the economic organization and strategies employed by the Mesilla Phase. The discovery of great kivas within the canyon point to social, political, economic, ritual, and calendric monitoring, representing at least 3 tiers of organizational structure associated with intercommunity management and water allocation, community organization and celestial monitoring, and intercommunity residential structure. Our efforts continue toward an understanding of the physical, social, and economic strategies that are represented. Our studies have not progressed to the level that we are able to specify or specifically recognize when intercommunity development required implementation of a hierarchical water management and allocation system. But by AD 650, the Creekside Village system had been in operation and modifications within the system were already being made. The reservoir, having produced the earliest date thus far, produced from organic matter recovered from the lacustrine sediments, not from wood, of AD 500, supports the notion that both the Twin Kivas system and Creekside Village were in place earlier than our current assigned dates of AD 600 to 900. Evidence of remodeling of the Creekside Great Kiva further supports the supposition that it functioned in excess of 50 years. Yet our limited excavations and small sample disallows us from offering supportive evidence of an earlier founding of Creekside Village and other irrigation communities in the canyon. Unfortunately, the ceramics of this time period offer little assistance with tighter chronometric controls, as all local pottery is undecorated with forms that exhibit few temporal clues. The greatest takeaway from our investigations thus far is recognition of the complexity of a strategic plan that included modification of the natural setting of Tularosa Canyon to an expansive agricultural economy. The finite resources were arable soils and water. Sufficient labor resulted in canal construction, conversion of wetlands to agricultural fields, and terracing. With 4 known irrigation systems in the canyon and 2 others suspected farther upstream, the water resources within Tularosa Canyon had to be closely monitored to allow all who participated in this cooperative venture to receive their fair share. Calendric monitoring likely provided the means through which water allocation was granted through community oversight and management that allowed each community sufficient amounts of water that likely maximized the capacity of the canyon's water resources. Yet these elements evade our ability to recognize them in the archaeological record, and we find ourselves applying methodological applications used by historic indigenous, Hispanic, and Anglo populations who continue their focus on agrarian economies within arid environments. The Creekside Village Great Kiva is the only Great Kiva in the canyon to be positioned with an unrestricted view of either the eastern or western horizon. As such, it likely was used to provide calendric observations to other canyon settlements regarding the timing of the agricultural cycle and associated rituals. Perhaps it also provided sufficient precision to regulate irrigation cycles among the canyon users. Aberration, perhaps, although agricultural-based economies in the arid Southwest have been shown to exist a millennium earlier along the Santa Cruz River in the Tucson area, as described by Vint and Niles, than in the Tularosa Canyon, a microcosm of agricultural intensification is more likely. Unfortunately, historic and modern development on the river terrace settings similar to those of Tularosa Canyon have had their impacts on the archaeological record since the late 1800s. Many have been altered to such an extent that few comparable settings remain preserved, allowing similar communities to be defined in the future. Time will tell as more holistic and cultural landscape studies are undertaken, which I hope that our investigations inspires others to undertake. As far as my personal opinion, Tularosa Canyon offers an incredible insight into a much more complex residential and subsistence strategy that was in place early among Jornada Mogollon people. Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge a few people here who have been of assistance to me. John Groh is oftentimes my co-author, and he's also a graphic artist who's put together some of these images. James Crable, if you don't know James Crable, he's really focused on southeastern Utah. We had some incredible talks about the alignment of the early Great Kivas and their association with a southeasterly orientation. He was very helpful with some of his ideas. George Zadi is the designer of Stellarium. Stephen Trainer developed Photographer's Ephemeris, which helps us with the dates and identifying when, at present time as well as back in time, when sunrises, sunsets, moon rises, and various celestial objects would occur. And then Michael Hampshire and Pueblo Grande Museum for that one image that I used, which was from Pueblo Salado, which I worked on at the Sky Harbor Airport in Phoenix. So at this point in time, I'm ready to take questions if anybody has any.
Alrighty. Thank you so much, David. Can you go back one slide to the jaguar? Yeah, that's an exquisite image. And I just want to thank you for inviting me to present at the conference coming up next week. And I would have talked about the Creation Center, the Maya Creation Center in Orion that you mentioned. Thank you. But this also represents the turning of the sky, the stars seemingly to appear to go around one central spot in the northern sky. But this was the original creation center that came over with the shamanic tradition from Asia very early on. So all across the Americas, the indigenous cultures were originally looking to that northern point in the sky where it's called the turning of the sky, where all of the stars go around. But for the Maya, it's very near the place where the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper, but most importantly, the Big Dipper is going around and around that central point. And that point has changed over time depending on precession, which they estimate about 1 degree every 72 years. So we have currently, it's a little bit off the North Star, but we always say the North Star. But anyway, in the Maya creation myth, the Popol Vuh, the hero twins, who also show up in the petroglyphs and the artwork
Mhm.
of the Southwest cultures. The hero twins, there's a portion of the Popol Vuh where they put down Seven McCall, who represents the Big Dipper, because he was taking up so much attention as a creation center. But they had to, with their blowguns, knock him out of his perch because they wanted to introduce two other more important creation centers, and one of them being the one that you mentioned, the Orion the creation center in Orion. But I want to say, if any part of the conference coming up in July, which you can talk about after I read a few questions, if any of that was virtual, I would definitely, give you my Orion talk. But I'm sorry I can't attend in person because many of you saw my cat who was here earlier. I just can't leave my cat with my 95-year-old mother.
Well,
But let's see. Wendy is commenting, as a gardener in Dallas, Texas, I can tell you if my tomatoes are not planted by March 15th, I will have very few tomatoes. If I depend solely on my own crops for food to last the year, the winter solstice is critically important. New Mexico's monsoon season also needs knowledge of time and probably cycles of animal behavior as well. Kivas would have encoded this knowledge.
yeah, and one of the things by monitoring the horizon as a calendar in this particular area, now we're a little bit higher in elevation, so we're at around 5,300 feet here. So we get our last killing frost usually by around April 15th. This year, I think it came on April 23rd and it wiped out all of our fruit trees. So if you're planting your corn probably before May 1st here, you're taking a risk that it comes up and it might get frosted. Um, so I would suspect that May 1st is probably that particular planting date that they were trying to observe, which coincidentally corresponds to the cross quarter date, which is the cross quarter date, if by definition, would be halfway between the equinox and then the summer solstice. So that would be like May 2nd. That's, in Celtic tradition, that's where we get May Day. They're celebrating what really is the first day of summer. We call June 1st the first day, or June 21st the first day of summer, the solstice. But it's in Europe they refer to it as midsummer or midwinter for the winter solstice. So the cross quarter date is that point at which it seems to be safe in this particular location to be able to plant your corn and probably your squash. The beans are really susceptible to frost, so you might even wait a few weeks before you plant beans. But this is a monitoring type of thing where if you plant too early, you're really risking maybe losing all of your seed corn. So that would be important to avoid that because now you're going to have to borrow corn kernels from your food supply in order to put a crop in the ground again. So, I understand what you're saying about, the area where you live, it gets terribly hot and probably beats those tomatoes back. Here we have to be more concerned about a late frost in the spring or an early killing frost in the fall.
Hmm. And the monsoon season down there, that's the storms coming off the Pacific, hurricanes and storms.
Right. Right. So, um, the monsoonal pattern generally starts as we have moisture coming onshore that's being pushed basically in a northward pattern up the west coast um, out in the Pacific until it starts to run into um, pockets of or air masses coming down from the Bering Strait area, and they kind of collide off of the west coast of Southern California, off of Baja, forcing that moisture-laden air to move into a from the south into a south or into a northeasterly direction, cutting across northern Sonora, southern part of Arizona, and into New Mexico. And by the time that moisture gets into southern New Mexico, we also get moisture that's circulating out of the Gulf of Mexico. It circulates down across Mexico and comes up from the south, and it runs into that airflow coming from off of Baja, California. The combined moisture in those two systems, when they come together, continue in a northeasterly pattern direction until they reach the Midwest into um, like central Kansas, eastern Nebraska, Iowa, and such. And that's where the farmers back there they rely on that direct precipitation that comes during those monsoonal season, delivering water for their agricultural crops. So yeah, that's where it's coming from.
Yeah, I've had a little bit of experience with that with back in the 70s, uh, when I graduated from high school, we took a family trip in a station wagon pulling a camper from South Florida out to Yellowstone and the California national parks and then back across. But they had me driving at night in Death Valley, and we wanted to cross during the night because we figured it'd be cooler. But even so, you could have your arm over by the window and you wouldn't see any sweat. The sweat would evaporate and just salt on your arm. But there were probably one of the only times at the time at night when the giant thunderstorms and lightning all across the sky, and we would come over a little hill in the road and then all of a sudden see that there's one of the creeks, dry bed creeks, was now a flowing river and flowing over the highway, and uh, tumbleweeds and everything moving across. My father was just like, keep driving, keep driving. So that's a big memory for me of if that was evidence of the period of the monsoons out there. But Margaret, she's coming across as Margaret. She asks, have Joan Price and Ron Barber's calendrical studies been published in peer-reviewed journals? She's only seen presentations, so it's hard to reference those.
Uh, I would say that they have not been published in peer-reviewed journals. Um, uh, I'm not. It's possible that Ron's stone calendar project might have been, but I don't think it has. No.
Yeah. And Ron's going to be one of the people presenting at the conference, right?
Yeah, Ron will be there to talk about the stone calendar project. Yeah.
Yeah. And Joe is asking, do you use survey equipment to reveal channel paths? Rocks showing repositioning, eyeballing?
Um, I do a lot of legwork, and we basically use GPS units to determine and map the routes of canals. Um, uh, we'll get elevations. I know elevations are not always as accurate as they could be with GPS units, portable handheld GPS units, but they do help us. There's some clues that I always share with our volunteers when we're out looking at these canals. The one thing about recognizing the canal in the landscape is that it's always running in on a steady gradient. It does not go up and over hills like roads and trails do. So if you had an alignment that goes up over a ridge, it's not a canal. It's probably a road or a trail. And I also carry like a it's like a handheld builder's level, which I find really useful because a lot of times I've encountered incidences where I swear I was walking an alignment and going uphill, and I was like ready to dismiss it as a canal alignment, and then I started using this builder's level, handheld level, and I was able to determine that it was an optical illusion based on the adjacent topography. So the slope of a ridge, for example, would make you think that what you're looking at is going uphill when that ridge was actually dropping, and it seems like that canal or ditch was going uphill, and in fact it wasn't. It was actually running almost level at that point. But so I carry that in my backpack all the time just to kind of double check what I'm looking at. And so it's been well, I should also say that in the Tularosa Basin, because of overgrazing historically, there's generally a thin sand sheet that covers what would have been the prehistoric surface. And we don't have that in Tularosa Canyon. There's been very little deposition that's occurred in the last 1,500 years in Tularosa Canyon, except on the floodplain itself. So a lot of what we see is evident on the surface. We really don't have to do much digging. We do more like shovel scraping to expose a fresh surface, and oftentimes we can see the difference in the difference between canal fill and the natural sediments that are there. So we're able to trace these out by doing very, very little disturbance to the site itself. But usually we can see something on the surface that gives us reason to do a little scraping there. So that it's really quite a phenomenal place to go and identify these very subtle features on the surface that really are not deeply buried at all.
All right. Well, Dave, could I ask you to please stop sharing?
Okay.
And then is there anybody who wants to unmute and ask a question in person? All right. Well, Dave, thank you so much for putting this together for us. And I'll get the recording up on the Aztlander YouTube channel in a few days. But can you please tell us about the conference coming up in July?
Yeah. So we arranged the conference to be held over 3 days, July 7th, 8th, and 9th. And we picked those days because July 8th will be the southern lunar major rise, visible from the Great Kiva. So the lunar standstill will arise above Islatano Peak at about 7:38 in the evening, and we wanted to have that as part of our conference event, and we filled up the tour that we're offering for it. So we're going to do it again on the following night, which it'll be just a little bit off, but it'll be even more impressive because it'll be just starting to get dark the following night on the 9th. And if it does rain and we can't go out and see this firsthand, we plan to have a video to show at the conference so that people can see what it really looked like. But that's why we selected those dates, July 7th, 8th, and 9th, and that's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Um, on Thursday, July 10th, we've arranged with the New Mexico Museum of Space History in Alamogordo for an open house there. We're going to have tours early that morning as part of the conference. But then at 10 o'clock, the museum will open and we'll have a rest of the day with, I think we have two speakers and two video presentations to share. And then there will be two other individuals who will be having some exhibits on some of their work. And so that is a day that's open to the public. It's free for everybody. And just another day of activities to learn more about celestial archaeology. And um, let's see, I think we have 20, I think it's 29 speakers um, that'll be presenting over those 3 days. It's a full schedule of presentations and activities. And it's part of our Tularosa Basin Conference series that we do, which we do these conferences every 2 or 3 years. They're not something that we do every year, um, largely because I'm the one who ends up doing all the organization and I can only handle one every 2 or 3 years. So they're a lot of work. But given what we found in Tularosa Canyon and the fact that there were even some earlier recorded archaeoastronomy sites in the area that Pete Eidenbach and Mark Wimberly discovered in the late 70s, that we are also taking a look at this present time and updating the work that they did. We just thought it was probably an appropriate time, since we're in the lunar maximum period, to host this event. And so we have speakers from across the Southwest, Midwest, Mexico. We have researchers who have worked in the Mayan area. We have individuals coming from the UK and across the European Union to be speaking. And um, it should be a really good live event. We are not doing this um, as a virtual type of conference, and we hope to have a lot of good time interacting with the various speakers. And of course, I think Jim already mentioned that Al Dart will be there speaking about some sites in southern Arizona. So if you can, join us. Um,
That's in
and if,
Ruidoso?
yeah,
That,
it's in Ruidoso, New Mexico at the convention center. And at least that's at 7,000 feet, so it's a little bit cooler. And it's supposed to rain tomorrow. We're supposed to get an inch of rain here, which we haven't had an inch of rain at one time in probably the last 7 years. So it's been really, really dry here, and we're looking forward to the rain.
all right. And what's the website or where can people register?
Okay, we have two websites. You can go to our Jornada Research Institute website. So if you just spell Jornada, which is JORNADA, Research Institute is one word, .org. You can find us on there. And then our other website is the Tularosa Basin Conference, all spelled out as one word, Tularosa Basin. Tularosa being Tularosa. A lot of people think it has something to do with red roses, but it's actually translates as red reed, because when the original villagers settled in Tularosa in 1862, there was all these reeds growing along this marshy area, this wetland area at the mouth of the canyon, and so that's where it got its name. So we literally live in the Tules here.
Oh, that's interesting. Reed is one of the names for those kind of plants that grow along the waterways.
Right. It's a riparian plant. We have reeds, cattails, various types of water grasses, the sedges, and then of course willows are common in the vegetation record. Oddly enough, cottonwoods don't show up very much in the paleobotanical record, but willows are quite common.
That in the Maya realm, in the Mesoamerican realm, reed is one of the months.
Right.
So when I saw a book way back out of high school, I saw a book, The Mayan Factor by Jose Arguelles, but he mentioned that the historical Quetzalcoatl was born on the day one reed in the year one reed, and that's what set me off on my whole journey.
Oh, wow.
Was like, how did my last name get involved with these Mesoamerican cultures? And I lived a year and a half in Belize. I lived 7 years in Guatemala. And then I came back and started doing slideshows with all these photos of pyramids I had. And that's where my whole career took off, was because of the reeds.
Yeah.
Well, I
It,
thank you, David. And like I said, I'll post the recording in a few days. And I wish you a lot of luck with the conference.
well, thank you for the opportunity. Sorry about the issue that we had at the beginning. Um, Fortunately, I had planned on having a backup system just in case something happened and I had to go to it. So,
Strange that we got it working perfect in 15 seconds in our test.
yeah, I mean, it was great. It worked perfectly.
Um, Roger's got a pretty long comment here. I don't know if it's pertinent at this point, but in Phoenix, monsoon usually occurs between June and September. Right now, humidity running around 20% and dew point around 30%. A monsoon was thought to begin its season after three straight days of 55% dew point. Being hard to understand, June 15th to September 15th is looked upon as monsoon today. Summer winds are out of the southwest, bringing in moisture from Mexico. A bad monsoon a few years ago saw humidity and dew point over 70%, not dropping below. The moisture runs to the Colorado rim and cools, creating thunderheads that drop down into the deserts. Nice years are light evening rains. Bad years are totally dry or flooding. Since the desert ground is likely concrete, desert flooding happens easily if you experience on your trip as a kid. Roger.
Well, Roger's one of our members. He just recently joined Jornada Research. So thanks for the comment, Roger. Yeah, I haven't seen dew point around here that high. I don't know in how long, but um, our typical humidity where we live up Tularosa Canyon is usually in the low 30s to maybe mid 30s. So it's actually more humid here than you think, but we also have the stream running right behind our house, so that probably accounts for some of that humidity that we experience here.
And also Laura. Laura says this was a great presentation and she can't wait for the conference.
And that was Laura. Do we have a last name?
She's going by the other Laura. No, there's no last name here.
Okay.
But all right. So once again, thank you, Dave.
Oh,
And
it's my pleasure to be here.
thanks for watching this Aztlander presentation. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel. To subscribe to free monthly issues of the Aztlander, Magazine of the Americas, contact your host, Jim Reed, at jimreedmaya@gmail.com. Thanks again. See ya next time.